True History of the Oriental Alchemists, Chapter the 12th, Juridical Stones and Their Worship. The monolith, talisman, mysterious pillar, or stone memorial, raised in attestation of the fire tradition and occupying the principal square or place, forum, or middlemost or naval point of the city in ancient times, is the original of our British market crosses. The cromlech, or billethon, or trilithon, the single, double, or grouped stones found in remote places, in Cornwall, in Wales, in various countries of England, in by spots in Scotland, in the Scottish Isles, in the Isle of Man, and in Ireland, also in Brittany, in various parts of France and Spain, nay, throughout Europe, and occurring to recognition, in fact, in all parts of the world, old and new. All these stone of memorial, older than history, speak the secret faith of the ancient peoples. Stonehenge, with its inner and outer circles of stones, enclosing the central mythic object or altar, all the Druidic or Celtic remains, stones on the top of mountains, altar tables in the valley, the center measuring or obelisk, stones in marketplaces or center spaces in great towns, from which the highways radiated, spaced in mileage to distance, that time-honored relic, London stone, still extant in Cannon Street, London, the Scottish sacred stone, with its famous oracular gifts, vulgarly called Jacob's pillow, transported to England by the dominant Edward I, and preserved in the seat of the coronation chair in Westminster Abbey. Even the placing of upright stones as tombstones, which is generally accepted as a mere means of personal record, for, be it remembered, the ancients placed tablets against their walls by way of funeral regis, all follow the same rule. We consider all these as variations of the upright commemorative pillar. The province of Brittany in France is thickly studded with stone pillars, and the history and manners of its people teem with interest and very curious traces of the worship of them. In these parts and elsewhere they are distinguished by the name of menhirs and pinovans. The superstitious veneration of the Irish people for such stones is well known. Monsieur de Fremenville says in his Antiques du Finistère, page 106, the Celts worshipped a divinity which united the attributes of Sibyl and Venus. This worship prevailed also in Spain, as doubtless throughout Europe, inasmuch as we find the 11th and 12th councils of Toledo warning those who offered worship to stones that they were sacrificing to devils. We are taught that the juridical institution of Britain was Pythagorean or patriarchal or Brahmaniacal. The presumed universal knowledge which this order possessed, and the singular customs which they practiced, have afforded sufficient analogies and affinities to maintain the occult and remote origin of Druidism. A Welsh antiquary insists that the juridical system of the metempsychosis was conveyed to the Brahmins of India by a former immigration from Wales. But the reverse may have occurred if we trust the elaborate researches which would demonstrate that the Druids were a scion of the Oriental family. The reader is referred to Toland's History of the Druids in his miscellaneous works, Volume 2, page 163. also to a book published in London, 1829, with the title The Celtic Druids, or an attempt to show that the Druids were the priests of Oriental colonies who immigrated from India. By Godfrey Higgins. A recent writer confidently intimated that the knowledge of Druidism must be searched for in the Talmudical writings, but another in return asserts that the Druids were older than the Jews. Whence and when the British Druids transplanted themselves to this lone world amid the ocean, no historian can write. We can judge of the Druids simply by the sublime monuments which are left of them, surviving in their majestic loneliness through the ages of civilization. Unhewn masses are heaps of stone, tell alone their story. Such are their cairns and cromlechs and cornices, and that wild architecture whose stones hang on one another, still frowning on the plains of Salisbury. Among the most remarkable ancient remains in Wales, both north and south, are the Druidical stones, poised in the most extraordinary manner, a real engineering problem. The slightest touch will sometimes suffice to set in motion the logan, or rocking, stones, whether these balanced masses are found in Wales or elsewhere. We think that there is very considerable ground for concluding that all these mounted stones were oracular, or, so to express it, speaking, and that when sought for divine responses, they were caused first to tremble, then to heave, and finally, like the tables of the modern so-called spiritualists, to tip intelligibly. To no other reason than this could we satisfactorily refer the name under which they are known in Wales, namely bowing stones. For the idea that they were denominated bowing stones because to the people they formed objects of adoration, and a supposition infinitely less satisfactory. The reader will perceive that we admit the phenomenon when the mysterious rapport is effected of the spontaneous sensitiveness and ultimate sympathetic motion of solid objects. No one who has witnessed the strange, unexplained power which tables, after proper preparation, acquire of supplying intelligent signals, impossible as it may seem to those who have not witnessed and tested this phenomenon. But we'll see that there is a great likelihood of these magic stones having been reared and haunted by the people for the special sensitive capacity. This idea would greatly increase the majesty and wonder of them. In other respects, except for some extraordinary and superstitious use, these mysterious solitary stones appear objectless. The famous Round Table of King Arthur, in regard to which that mystic hero is understood to have instituted an order of knighthood. It was also something else, to which we make reference in other parts of our book. May have been a magical consulting disc, round which he and his peers set for oracular directions. As it is of large dimensions, it presents a similarity not only to some of the prophesying stones, but also in a greater degree to the movable enchanted drums of the Lapps and Finns, and to the divining tables of the shamans of Siberia. There lies an unsuspected purpose, doubtless of a mysterious, very probably of a superstitious and supernatural character. In this exceedingly ancient memorial of the mythic British and heroic time at Winchester, when spires or steeples were placed on churches, and succeeded the pyramidal tower, or square or round tower, these pointed erections were only the perpetuation of the original monolith. The universal signal was reproduced through the phases of architecture. The supposition that the object of the steeple was to point out the church to the surrounding country explains but half its meaning. At one period of our history, the signal lights abounded all over the country as numerously as church spires do in the present day, exalted on eminences, dotting hills, spiring on cliffs, perched on promontories, from behind sea inland, and from the interior of the country to broad riverside and to the seashore, rising from woods, a universal telegraph, and a picturesque landmark. The tower, in its meaning, spoke the identical, unconscious tradition with the blazing Baal, or Beltane fires, those universal votive torches which are lost sight of in the mist of antiquity, and which were so continual in the pagan countries, so reiterated through the early ages, and which still remain so frequent in the feudal and monastic periods. These were all connected closely with religion. The stone tower was only, as it were, a stationary flame. The origin of beacons may be traced to the highest antiquity. According to the original Hebrew, which language, as the Samaritan, is considered by competent judges as the very oldest, the word beacon may be rendered a mark, monolith, pillar, or upright. At one time the ancient Baal, or religious fires of Ireland, were general all over the country. They have been clearly traced to a devotional origin, and are strictly of the same character as magic or Magian fires of the East. During the political discontents of 1831 and 1832, the custom of lighting these signal fires was very generally revived amidst the party distractions in Ireland. In the ancient language of this country, Ireland, the month of May is yet called Nic Beal Din, or the month of Beal, Bel or Baal's forest, fire. The Beltane festival in the Highlands has been ascribed to a similar origin. Druidical altars are still to be traced on many of the hills in Ireland, where Baal, Bel, fires were lighted. Through the countries in the present day which formed the ancient Scandinavia, and in Germany, particularly in the north, on the 1st of May, as in celebration of some universal feast or festival, fires are even now lighted on the tops of the hills. How closely this practice accords with the superstitious usages of the Bohemians, or fire kings of Prague, is discoverable at a glance. All these western flames are representative of the early fire, which was as equally the object of worship of the Gubers or Gars of Persia, as it is the admitted natural principle of the Parsis. Parsis, Bohemians, the Gypsies, or Jengare, and the Webers are unite in a common legendary fire worship. Beside the ancient market crosses and wayside Gothic uprights, of which so many picturesque specimens are yet to be found in England, Wales, and Scotland, we may enumerate the splendid funeral crosses raised by the brave and pious King Edward to the memory of his wife. Holinshed writes, in the 19th year of King Edward, Queen Eleanor, King Edward's wife, died. Upon St. Andrew's even, at Heardebe, or Heardely, as some have near to Lincoln, in every town and place where the corpse rested by the way, the king caused a cross of cunning workmanship to be erected in remembrance of her. 2 of the like crosses were set up at London, one at Westcheap, the last but one, and the other at Charing, which is now Charing Cross, and where the last cross was placed. The final obsequies were solemnized in the Abbey Church at Westminster on the Sunday before the day of St. Thomas the Apostle by the Bishop of Lincoln, and the king gave 12 manors and hamlets to the monks to defray the charges of yearly obits and of gifts to the poor, in lasting commemoration of his beloved consort. Some writers have stated the number of crosses raised as above at 13. These were Lincoln, Newark, Grantham, Leicester, Stamford, Geddington, Northampton, Stony Stratford, Woburn, Dunstable, St. Albans, Waltham, West Giape, Cheapside, not far from where a fountain for a long time took the place of another erection, and where the statue of Sir Robert Peel now stands. The last place where the body rested, whence the memorial cross sprung, and which the famous equestrian statue of King Charles I now occupies, is the present noisy highway of Charing Cross, and as then it opens to the royal old Abbey of Westminster. What a changed street is this capital opening at Charing Cross! What a changed street is this capital opening at Charing Cross, Whitehall, and Parliament Street, from the days, it almost then seeming a river-bordered country road, when the cross spired at one end, and the old abbey closed the view southwards. In regard to the royal and sumptuous obsequies of Queen Eleanor, Fabian, who compiled his chronicles toward the latter part of the reign of Henry VII, speaking of her burial place, has the following remark: She hath two wax tapers bringing upon her tomb, or she has 2 wax tapers burning upon her tomb, both day and night, which so hath continued since the day of her burying to this present day. The beacon warning, the fiery cross of Scotland, the universal use of fires on the tops of mountains, on the seashore, and on the highest turrets of castles, to give the signal of alarm, and to telegraph some information of importance, originated in the first religious flames. Elder to these summoning or notifying lights was the mysterious worship to which fire rose as the answer. From religion, the beacon passed into military use on certain set occasions and on special saints' days, and at other times of observance, as the traveler in Ireland well knows. The multitude of fires on the tops of the hills, and in any conspicuous situation, would gladden the eyes of the most devout Parsi. The special subject of illumination However, we may have become accustomed to regard it as the most ordinary expression of triumph and of mere joyous celebration, has its origin in a much more abstruse and sacred source. In Scotland, particularly, the reverential ideas associated with these mythic fires are strong. Perhaps in no country have the impressions of superstition deeper hold than in enlightened, thoughtful, educated, and in so many respects prosaic Scotland. And in regard to these occult and ancient fires, the tradition of them and the ideas concerning their origin are preserved as a matter of more than cold speculation. Country legendary accounts of local usages, obtained from we know not whence, all referring to the same myth, all pointing to the same protean superstition, are traceable to the present in all the English countries. Cairns in Scotland, heaps of stones and by-spots in England, especially solitary or in group, to be found on the tops of hills, the Druidical mounds, the raising of crosses on the continent, in Germany amongst the winding of the Alps, in Russia by the roadside or the entrance of villages, in Spain, in Poland, in lonely and secluded spots. Probably even the first use of the signpost at the junction of roads. All these points in strange, widely radiant suggestion to the fire religion. Whence obtained is the word sign, as designating the guide or direction, post placed at the intersection of crossroads. Nay, whence gained we that peculiar idea of the sacredness or of the forbiddenness attaching to the spot where four roads meet? It is sacred, as sacred in the Latin. Again, it is sacred, or sacred in the Latin, extra church or heathen, supposedly unhallowed in the modern acceptation. The appellêtur ob in the word obelisk means occult, secret, or magic. Ob is the biblical name for sorcery. It is also found as a word signifying converse with forbidden spirits among the Negroes of the coast of Africa, from whence, and indicating the practices marked out by it, it was transplanted to the West Indies, where it still exists. It is well known that a character resembling the runic alphabet was once widely diffused throughout Europe. A character, for example, not unlike the hammer of Thor, is to be found in various Spanish inscriptions and lurks in many magical books. Sir William Jones proceeds our author, who we quote from the Times of the 2nd of February, 1859, in reviewing a work upon Italy by the Lord Broughton, has drawn a parallel between the deities of Meru and Olympus, and an enthusiastic might perhaps maintain that the vases of Alba Longa were a relic of the times when one religion prevailed in Latium and in Hindustan. It is most singular that the Hindu cross is precisely the hammer of Thor. All our speculations tend to the same conclusion. One day it is a discovery of cinerary vases, the next it is etymological research, yet again it is ethnological investigation, and the day after it is the publication of unsuspected tales from the Norse. But all go to heap up the proofs of our consanguinity with the peoples of history, and of an original general belief, we might add. What meaneth the altar with its mysterious lights? What mean the candles of the Catholic worship, burning even by day, born in the sunshine, blazing at noon? What meaneth the visible fire as an element at Mass, or at service at all? Wherefore is this thing, light, employed as a primal witness and attestation in all worship? To what end? To what end? To what end? And expressive of what mysterious meaning, surviving through the changes of the faiths and the renewal of the churches, and as yet undreamt, burn the solemn lamps in multitude, in their richly worked, their highly wrought cases of solid gold or of glowing silver, bright glancing in the midst of incense and in the swell or fall of sacredly melting or of holily entrancing music. Before spiry shrine and elaborate drop-work tabernacle, in twilight hollow, diapered as into a glory of stone, and in sepulchred niche, in the serried and starry ranks of the columned wax, or in rows of bossy crescents, intertwined and congregate the perfumed flames as implying the tradition eldest of time. What meaneth in the papal architectural piles, wherein the ghostly fire is enshrined, symbolic real fire, thus before the high altar? What speak those constellations of light? What those silvery stars of annunciation? What signifieth fire upon the altar? What gather we all from altars and from sacrifices, the delivering as through the gate of fire, of the first and the best of this world, whether of the fruits, whether of the flocks, whether of the primal and perfectest of victims, or the rich soil of the world states? What mean the human sacrifices of the heathen, the passing of the children through the fire to Moloch, the devotion of the consummate, the most physically perfect and most beautiful, to the glowing nemesis, in that keenest, strangest, yet divinest fire appetite, the offered plunder, the surrendered lives of the predatory races? What signifies the sacrifice of Iphigenia, the burning of living people among the Gauls, the Indian fire immolations? What is intended by the patriarchal sacrifices? What is intended even by the patriarchal sacrifices? What is the meaning of the burnt offering so frequent in the Bible? In short, what read we, and what seem we conclusively together, we repeat in this mystic thing, and hitherto almost meaningless, if not contradictory and silencing institution of sacrifice by fire? What gather we, otherwise than in the explanation of the things signified by it? We speak of sacrifice as practiced in all ages, enjoined in all holy books, elevated into veneration as a necessity of the highest and most sacred kind. We find it in all countries, east, west, north, and south, in the old equally as in the new world. From whence should this strange and unexplainable rite come? And what should it mean? As indeed what should mean the display of bright fire at all in the mysteries, Egyptian, Cabiric, Scandinavian, Eleusinian, Etrurian, Indian, Persian, Primal American, Tartarian, Phoenician, or Celtic. From the earliest of times until this very modem, instant, English day of candles on altars, and of the only kindred religious high church lightings, respecting which were rankleth such scandal and intensified, such purposeless babble, such daily dispute? What should all this inveterate ritualistic, as it is absurdly called, controversy, and this ill-understood bandying be about? Is it that, even at this day, men do not understand anything about the symbols of their religion, and that the things for which they struggle are mere words, really that the principles of their wonderful and supernatural faith are perfectly unknown, and that they reason with the inconclusiveness but with nothing of the simplicity of children, nothing of the divine light of children? But we would boldly ask, what should all this wealth of fire subjects mean, of which men guess so little, and no less? What should this whole principle of fire and sacrifice be? Socratically, what should it signify but the rendering over and the surrender up in all abnegation of the state of man, of the best and most valued entities of this world, past and through the fire, which is the boundary and border and wall between this world and the next, that last element of all, on which is all, fire, having most of the light of matter in it, as it hath most of the blackness of matter in it, to make it the fiercer, and both being copy or shadow of the immortal and ineffable spirit light, of which, strange as it may sound, the sun is the very darkness, because that in the whole creation, as being decree, or even in its wonders, as greater or less, beautiful and godlike as it is to man, is as the shadow of God, and hath nothing of him, but is instituted as the place of purification, being or punishment, the opposite of God, the enemy of God, and in its results apart from the Spirit of God, which rescues supernaturally from it. The denier of God, this world and its shows, nay, life stands mystically as the devil, serpent, dragon, or adversary, typified through all time, the world terrestrial being the ashes of the fire celestial. The torches borne at funerals are not alone for light. They have their mystic meaning. They mingle largely, as do candles on altars, in all solemn celebrations. The employment of light in all religious rites, and in celebration in the general sense, has an overpoweringly great meaning. Festival also claims flame as its secret signal and its password to the propitious invisible. Lights and flambeaux and torches carried in the hand were ever the joyous accompaniment of weddings. The torch of Hymen, in a proverbial expression, the ever-burning lamps of the ancients, the steady, silent tomb lights, burning on for ages, from time to time discovered among the mouldering monuments of the past in the hypogea, or sepulchre caves, and buildings broken in upon by men in latter day, the bonfires of the modems, the fires on the tops of hills, the mass of lamps disposed about sanctuaries, whether encircling the most sacred point of the mosque of the prophet, the graded and cumulative grand altar in St. Peter's, or the saint thrones in the churches of the eternal city, or elsewhere, wherever magnificence riseth into expansion, and intersigneth and overpowereth in the sublimity which shall be felt, the multitudinous grouped lamps in the sacred stable, the place of the holy nativity, meanest and yet highest at Bethlehem, the steady, constant lights ever burning in mystic, blazing attestation in Jerusalem before the tomb of the Redeemer, the chapelle ardente in the funeral observances of the ubiquitous Catholic Church. The chapelle ardente in the funeral observances of the ubiquitous Catholic Church, the congregated tapers about the bed of the dead, the flames in mysterious grandeur and in royal awe. Picture it, placed as in waiting, so brilliant and striking and yet so terrible, a court, and surrounding the stately catafalque. The very word falcated, as bladed, sworded, or scimitard, as with the guard of waved and sickle-like flames. The lowly single candle at the bedside of the poverty-attenuated dead, thus by the single votive light, only allied, yet an unutterably mystic and godlike bond, as with the greatest of the earth, the watch lights everywhere, and in whatever country, the crosses, spiry memorials of monoliths, which rose as from out the earth, in imitation of the watching candle, at whatever point rested at night in her solemn journey to her home, to her last home, the body of Queen Eleanor, as told in the English annals, which flame memorials so raised by the pious King Edward in the spiry, flame-imitating stone, are all we believe, obliterate, or put out things. But the well-known, magnificent, restored cross at Waltham, all these to the keen philosophic eye, stand as the best proofs of the diffusion of this strange fire dogma, myth as equally, also in that dark, veiled Coieto, she to whom the flame of midnight torches burns. She, this blackest of concealment in the mysteries, Isis, Isis, Io, Ashtaroth, or Astarte, or Sybil, or Proserpine, he, male, female, quintessential one, this Baal, this Bel, this Baalim, Fo, Brahm, or Booth, it, for the myth is no personality, but sexless, snake, serpent, dragon, or earliest at all of locomotion. Under whatever letter of the alphabet, all these symbols, shapes, or names stand confessed in that first, absolutely primal, deified element, fire, which the world in all religions has worshipped, is worshipping, and will worship to the end of time, unconsciously. We, even in the Christian religion, and in our modern day, still doing it, unwittingly the meaning of the mysterious symbols which pass daily before our eyes, all which point, as we before have said, to spirit light as the soul of the world, otherwise to the inexpressible mystery of the Holy Ghost. Little is it suspected what is the myth conveyed in the Fakultanz and Fakulzug of Berlin, of which so much was heard as a curious observance at the time of the marriage of the Princess Royal of England with the Prince Frederick William of Prussia. This is the Teutonic perpetuation of the Bacchic glory, of the Saturnian rout, and flame brandishing of the earliest and last rites. The ring of light, glory, nimbus, aureole, or circle of rays about the heads of sacred persons, the hand, magnetic and mesmeric, upon scepters, the open hand borne in the standards of the Romans, the dragon crest of Maximin, of Honorius, and of the barbarian leaders, the dragon of China, and of Japan, the dragon of Wales, the mythic dragon trampled by St. George, the crowned serpent of the royal house of Milan, the cairns, as we have already affirmed, and the runic monuments. The round towers of Ireland, regarding which there hath been so much and so diverse and vain speculation, the memorial piles, and the slender on seashore and upland towers left by the Vikings, Vikinghs, Vikings, or sea kings, in their adventurous and predatory voyages. The legends of the Norsemen, or the Normans, the vestiges so recently in the discovery of the forward of the old-time ages, exposed to the light of criticism, in the time out of mine antique and quaint cities of the extant people, and of the forgotten religions in Central America, the sun or fire worship of the Peruvians, and their Vesto or virgin guardians of the fire, the priestly fire rites of the Mexicans, quenched by Cortes in the native blood, and the context of their strange, apparently incoherent, wild belief, the inscriptions of amulets on rings and on talismans, the singular dark, and in many respects uncouth arcana of the Bohemians, Zingari, Gitanos, and Gypsies, the teaching of the Talmud, the hints of the Kabbalah, although the little supposed things. Also that little supposed thing, even meant in the British golden collar of SS, which is worn as a relic of the oldest day in preparation and perpetuation of a mythos long ago buried spark-like and forgotten in the dust of ages by some of our officials, courtly and otherwise, and which belongs to no known order of knighthood, but only to the very highest order of knighthood, the Magian, or to magic. All these point, as in the diverging radii of the greatest and historical light suns, to the central and tolerable ring of brilliancy, or the phenomenon, the original God's revelation, eldest of all creeds, survivor almost of time, of the sacred spirit, of ghostly flame, the baptism of fire of the apostles. In this apparently strange, nay, to some minds alarming classification, and throwing under one head of symbols diametrically opposed as holy and unholy, benign and sinister, care must be taken to notice that the types of the snake or the dragon stand for the occult world fire, by which we mean the light of human reason or manifestation in the general sense, as opposed to the spiritual light or unbodied light, into which, as the reverse, although the same, the former transcends. Thus shadow is the only possible means of demonstrating light. It is not reflected upon that we must have means whereby to be lifted. After all, we deal only with glyphs to express inexpressible things. Horns mean spirit manifestation. Radius signifies the glorying absorption into the incomprehensible of that manifestation. Both signify the same. From any given point, the one spirit working downwards and also transcending upwards. From any given point in height that the intellect is able to achieve, the same spirit downwards intensifies into manifestation. Upwards dissipates into God. And in other words, before any knowledge of God can be formed at all, it must have a shape. God is an abstraction. Man is an entity. Chapter the 13th. Inquiry as to the possibility of miracle. The definition of a miracle has been exposed to numerous erroneous views. Inquirers know not what a miracle is. It is wrong to assume that nature and the human nature are alike invariably, and that you can interpret the one by the other. There may be in reality great divergence between the two, though both start from the common point, individuality. A miracle is not a violation of the laws of nature, because nature is not everything, but a something independent of all laws, that is, as we know laws. The mistake that is commonly made is the interpreting, or rather the perceiving, or becoming aware of that thing we denominate a miracle through the operation of the human senses, which in reality have nothing whatever to do with a miracle, because they cannot know it. If nature as we understand it, or law as we understand it, be universal, then as nothing can be possible to us which contradicts either the one or the other, both being the same, nature being law and law being nature, miracle must be impossible, and there never was, nor could there ever be such a thing as a miracle. But a miracle works outwardly from us at once, and not by a human path, moves away from the world, that is, man's world, as a thing impossible to it, though it may be true nonetheless, since our nature is not all nature, nor perhaps any nature, but even a philosophical delusion. In the conception of a miracle, however, the thing apprehended revolves to us, and can come to us in no other way, and we seize the idea of it through a machinery. Our own judgment, which is a clear sight compounded of our senses, a synthesis of senses that, in the very act of presenting an impossible idea, destroys it as humanly possible. Miracle can be of no date or time, whether earlier, whether later, if God has not withdrawn from nature. And if he has withdrawn from nature, then nature must have before this fallen to pieces of herself. For God is intelligence, not life only. And matter is not intelligent, though it may be living. It is not seeing that during that space, which is a space taken out of time, though independent of it, in which miracle is possible to us, we cease to be men, because time, or rather sensation, is man's measure. And that when we are men again, and back in ourselves, the miracle is gone, because the conviction of the possibility of a thing, and its non-possibility has expelled it. The persuasion of a miracle is intuition, or the operation of God's Spirit active in us, that drives out nature for the time, which is the opposite of the miracle. No miracle can be justified to men's minds, because no amount of evidence can sustain it. No number of attestations can affirm that which we cannot in our nature believe. In reality, we believe nothing of which our senses do not convince us, even these not always. In other matters, we only believe because we think that we believe. And since the conviction of a miracle has nothing of God except a certain sort of motive of possessed, excluding exaltation, which with the miracle fills us, and to which exaltation we can give no name, and which we can only feel as a certain something in us, a certain power, and a certain light, conquering and outshining another light, become fainter, it will follow that the conviction of the possibility of a miracle is the same sort of unquestioning assurance that we have of a dream in the dream itself. and that when the miracle is apprehended in the mind, it just as much ceases to be a miracle when we are in our senses, as a dream ceases to be that which it was, a reality, and becomes that which it is, non-entity, when we awake. But to the questions, what is a dream? Nay, what is waking? Who shall answer, or who can declare whether in that broad outside, where our minds and their powers evaporate or cease, where nature melts away into nothing that we can know as nature, or know as anything else in regard to dreams and realities, the one may not be the other. The dream may be man's life to him, as another life other than his own life, and the reality may be the dream in its various forms, which he rejects as false and confusion simply because it is as an unknown language, of which out of his dream he can never have the alphabet, but of which in the dream he has the alphabet, and can spell well, because that life is natural to him. A pretense that every strong and peculiar expression is merely an Eastern hyperbole is a mighty easy way of getting rid of the trouble of deep thought and right apprehension. It has helped to keep the world in ignorance. Morsels of Criticism, London, 1800. It is very striking that, in all ages, people have clothed the ideas of their dreams in the same imagery. It may therefore be asked whether that language which now occupies so low a place in the estimation of men be not the actual waking language of the higher regions, while we awake as we fancy ourselves, may be sunk in a sleep of many thousand years, or at least in the echo of their dreams, and only intelligibly catch a few dim words, that language of God, as sleepers do scattered expressions from the loud conversations of those around them. So says Schubert in his Symbolism of Dreams, there is every form of the dream state, from the faintest to the most intense, in which the gravitation of the outside world overwhelms the man's senses and absorbs the inner unit. In fact, the lightest and faintest form of dream is the very thoughts that we think. A very profound English writer, Thomas de Quincey, has the following: in the English rite of confirmation, by personal choice and by sacramental oath, each man says in effect, "Lo, I rebaptize myself, and that which once was sworn on my behalf, now I swear for myself." Even so in dreams. Perhaps under some secret conflict, today, on the enthronement of the Queen of Heaven Day, Mary herself, of the midnight sleeper, lighted up to the consciousness at the time, but darkened to the memory as soon as all is finished, every several child of our mysterious race may complete for himself the aboriginal fall, the ab-original fall, the sorcerer's fall. As to what is possible or impossible, no man, out of his presumption and of his self-conceit, has any right to speak, nor can speak, for the nature of his terms with all things outside of him is unknown to him. We know that miracle, if once generally believed in, would terminate the present order of things, which are perfectly right and consistent in their own way. Things that contradict nature are not evoked by reason, but by man in his miracle work imagining in all time, and such exceptions are independent of reason, which elaborates to a center downwards, but exhales to apparent impossibilities, but to real truth, upwards that is truth out of this world. Upwards has nothing of man, for it knows him not. He ceases there, but he is made as downwards, and finds his man's nature there, lowest of all, his mere bodily nature there perhaps, even to be found originally among the four-footed. For by the raising of him by God alone has man got upon his feet, and set his face upward to regard the stars. Those stars which originally, according to the great Hermes Trismegistus, thrice master, tris magistus, in the astrological sense, raised him from the primeval level, for we refer heaven always to a place over our heads, since there only we can be free of the confinements of matter. But above us or below us is equally the altitude. May not the sacrificial, sacramental rites, may not those minute acts of priestly offering, as they succeed each other and deepen in intensity and in meaning, may not those aids to music to enlarge and change and conjure the sense of hearing, and to react on sight, it being notorious that objects change their character really as we look at them, when operated upon by beautiful music, may not those dream-producing, somnolent, enchanting vapors of incense, which seem to loosen from around each of us, may not those dream-producing, somnolent, enchanting vapors of incense, which seem to loosen from around each of us the walls of the visible, and to the charm open the body, and to let out or let in new and unsuspected senses, a light with a new light not of this world, the light of a new spiritual world, in which we can yet see things, and see them as things to be recognized. May not all this be true and involve impossibilities as only seeming so, but truth enough, but true enough, inasmuch as miracle possibly is true enough? May not all these effects, and may not the place and persons in the body, and may not the suggestions laboring to that end of unseen, unsuspected holy ministries, such as thronging angels casting off from about us our swabs and bands of thick mortality in the new overmastering influence, may not all this be as the bridge across which we pass out from this world gladly into the next, until we meet, as on the other side, Jesus, the ruler in very deed, but now felt as the offered, the crucified, the complete and accepted, living, great sacrifice? May we not in this Eucharist, Eucharisto, partake not once but again and again of that, even of that solid which was our atonement, and of that blood which was poured out as the libation to the great earth, profaned by sin, partaking of the reddest, that most transcendently lucent sacrament, which is to be the new light of a new world? Is not the very name of the intercommunicating high priest that of the factor of this mystic, glorious, spirit-trodden, invisible bridge? Whence do we derive the word pontifex, or pontifex maxims, the greatest or highest bridge maker or builder? Elicited in direct translation from the two Latin words pons and facile, in the earliest pre-Christian theologies, and become pontiff in the Roman and the Christian sense, pontiff from pontifex. It is surely this meaning, that of fabricator or maker of the bridge between things sensible and things spiritual, between body and spirit, between this world and the next world, between the spiritualizing thither and the substantiating hither, Trans being transit, the world, the whole word is not the whole meaning, may be accepted in this Roman Catholic sense of transubstantiation or the making of miracle. Never idolatry, but idea, recognizing and acknowledging.